The Fire Store, equipping protectors with passion. Every decision the Fire Store makes as a company is about its customers. As the holiday season has quickly approached, explore a wide selection of unique and practical gifts at the Fire Store's Gift Center. Find the perfect presents for firefighters, EMTs, and first responders today. The Fire Store's goal is to get you the gear you need when you need it at prices you can afford. Visit thefirestore.com for everything but the truck and shop its family of brands including Streamlight, MSA, Lion, Fleer, and more.
Welcome to Fire Service Court Radio. This is John Murphy, retired Deputy Fire Chief and Attorney at Law. For right now, apparently I'm flying solo. Usually we have Chip Comstock, Brad Pinsky, and Kurt Verone, probably all off in the United States wilderness somewhere practicing law, which is always a good thing. And I think Chip may come on depending on what his schedule is. But I think what I'm going to do today is essentially do a review of what I feel, and I think my cohorts feel, is a sort of the important issues that are facing the fire service today. And it's a recap of the other shows and writings that we have done in fire engineering and on this blog and on this show as well. So I think that, and the reason I'm doing this is I got an opportunity to present pressing legal issues for the Bellevue Fire Department, new fire officers. And stand by for a second. I'm going to text Chip. No problemo. And so I was invited over to do a class, and so the training officer and myself picked out a theme, several themes actually, about what are the hot issues that are facing the fire service today, and made a presentation for that. And I think I appreciated the opportunity to go. The second is, when I became a fire officer, we flew by the seat of our pants, and I'm sure that many of you are in that same situation. So we learned the job on the job. We learned the law as we got sued or made mistakes and those sorts of things. And it made, I think, a big difference in outcomes of litigation that helped us do a better job. One of the reasons that I think most of us are attorneys is it was a good opportunity to pass our knowledge forward in the fire service under a sort of a different mechanism or modality, as opposed to being fire chiefs, which are two or three of us are. The law, as a lawyer, it sort of levels the playing field if you get sued, or if you get asked to go teach a class about certain legal issues. So when I was talking to the Bellevue guys, we talked about lots of different things, like recruiting and retention, discrimination, inclusion and diversity, the issues dealing with your firefighters, sexual harassment, bullying, those sorts of things. We talked about the LGBTQ issues. We talked about nursing mothers in the fire station. We talked about if your firefighter gets injured and how do they get back to work. Because one of my responsibilities is, I wear my medical hat as a physician's assistant, as I work a lot with labor industry worker comp injuries and firefighters that are injured on the job, and how do you get them back into work. And I've been working with a few other attorneys across the country in litigation because the standards that's being used by the medical expert or the fire chief is not the right application of the standard, which we all know is the 1582 standard. We talked about a little bit about presumptive illness and how we can make sure that our firefighters are safe, and if they do become ill or injured, what do we do to take care of them? We talked about reasonable suspicion in marijuana, and then finally we talked a little bit about behavioral health and firefighter suicides, and that's a lot of topic area to talk about. So I was fortunate enough to have enough time to kind of briefly go through those areas of interest and talk about the things that are affecting their department specifically, because I'm a neighbor of their department and I sort of take a pulse of what's happening. And then the other part is just seeing what's going on around our country and reading Kurt Verone's blog and other articles in fire periodicals and other magazines that affect us. And I would encourage you And I also encourage the new Bellevue fire officers to read, because you learn a lot what is going on, not only in your own department, which you should be fully aware of, but you have to understand what goes on out in the real world where litigation occurs all the time. So we get sued a lot. And I think that we have found through some research, again, that Kurt Verona's done, is that it's not the Mrs. Smiths of the community that sue us, it's the firefighters that sue us. And so I think one of our biggest defense positions here, and just as a lawyer, I'll give you free advice, is, don't break the law and you won't get sued. But we need to do more in the department to prevent that sort of litigation. Lots of litigation that we see is mostly on discrimination, how we treat each other, which is not very well a lot of times. We discriminate, we harass, we bully, we retaliate against people. We make it as hard as possible, I think, for some people to survive in your environment. And so you, as firefighters, fire chiefs, fire officers, have a duty, I think, to each other, not only to yourself, but to your department and your community, to do the legal right things. It's easier to do it that way than it is to try to figure out a way to try to screw over your fellow firefighters and discriminate against them or harass them in some form or fashion. A couple of the big topic areas that I know that that's out and about is the Fair Labor Standards Act and pay. And under the most contracts that we have, there's equal pay for equal work. And so all your firefighters, regardless of race or gender, are equitably paid. Where we find some difficulties is in the volunteer areas, or the companies that have two-hatters there. Like you're a career guy and then you're a volunteer, and so that causes some difficulty in how many hours of work do you get paid for? Are you working as a volunteer, or are you working as a career guy? And so there's a couple really good classes out there. I think those of you who are in sort of the crosshairs of an investigation or a complaint that I'm not getting all my money because I worked 8 hours here and I worked 12 hours here, and they only paid me for 10 hours for the whole thing, and that's obviously not correct. So we need to make sure that as your department, and maybe not you individually as the firefighter, and I know that you do count hours and you keep track of your time, but it's the people that are above you, the HR director, the accounting division, the fire chief, should be fairly very aware of the FLSA things that are sort of plaguing certain sections of our industry. One of the things we talked about in the class was pregnancy discrimination, and there's been several litigations around the country where women who become pregnant basically not afforded equal time in light duty. And I would point to the Davie, Florida case several years ago where there was a complaint filed. There was retaliation. It's like a drama. We're all a drama here, like a movie. And every element of bad behavior occurred. And the bottom line was it was an unequitable or inequitable administration of light duty. And so the feds came in, the Department of Justice came in and sued on behalf of the firefighters that were either affected by it or retaliated against for reporting it. And then they, for a period of time, they had a consent decree, which means that you're not really admitting guilt, but you know that there's something going on. And so they put a monitor, which is either a judge or a lawyer, in to manage their HR division for a while, to make sure that it was equitable administration of light duty. And so the government, our government, recently passed what's called the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, the PWFA, passed in 2022, talks about making reasonable accommodations for your pregnant employees in the way of light duty assignments, when you go off the job on maternity leave, and when you are allowed to come back to the job. And so the sort of the bottom line to that is the relationship for your pregnant workers is between the pregnant firefighter and her doctor, And so they make a decision on, what sort of duty that person can perform. The the alternative is some of your pregnant firefighters may take time off immediately. They say, I'm pregnant, I'm not going to come to work. Others will wait till the last nanosecond in the third trimester when they're in labor to say, well, I'm going to have my baby, I'm going off the job now. So it runs the gamut from early to late. There is a couple of cases. I think one of the things that we worry about is the toxic environment that we work in. And there's a case called Johnson Controls that was many, many years ago when they talk about women working the line in a battery assembly operation. And as we all know, the older type batteries are made out of a lot of lead. Lead is toxic to fetal tissue. And so they basically said, if you're a woman, you can't be on the line. And that line always made more money, had more overtime. So there was an economic disparate treatment. And so these women sued for the right to work on the line because the responsibility for fetal health actually belongs to the woman and not to the employer. And so that was a seminal case, I think, in women's rights as they can work in a hazardous environment. They take the responsibility. And I know that I've been asked several questions about, well, what if I do have a firefighter who's contaminated by asbestos or by a gas or those sorts of things? I go, you're just going to have to put as many protective mechanisms into place in order to keep them safe. But if there's something happens, the liability is on mostly them, but you probably will get sued and have to defend yourself. So make sure that if you're in those sort of environments or you have one of your workers that are exposed, that you do good documentation on the exposure and how they were treated and how they came back to work and all that other stuff. So pregnant workers is one. The other one is that there's another issue dealing with your pregnant firefighters that had their babies. They're coming back to work. They may need to pump at work to express breast milk. And so a lot of the departments don't know what to do about that. How does that all affect us? And what do I have to do under the law to make that, a safe and hazardous-free environment? Again, there's been some departments that basically just bullheadedly said, if you're going to express milk, you're going to do it, on your own time, and you're going to do it, in some places that nobody can see you, which could be the apparatus bay, it could be the hose tower, it could be a bathroom, all the unsanitary places that you can have in the fire service. And a good case to look at is the Tucson, Arizona case. And again, that went sort of to the wall, large award, made some changes in the way they administer the policy for lactating firefighters. And then recently, the federal government stepped in order to kind of regulate and to put into play what the rules are. And it's under the, the PUMP Act, P-U-M-P. It's called the Providing Urgent Maternal Protections for Nursing Mothers Act. And it essentially went into effect in 2022, protecting the rights of nursing mothers to pump, expands workplace employees' protections for them. And then that the employer needs to provide certain accommodations for those firefighters that are expressing milk. And you can do it on the job. You're compensated. It's just part of your regular work day. You can't be taken off the clock and then come back on 20 or 40 minutes later, however long it takes for the expression of breast milk to take. So it's considered hours of work. So you can't penalize somebody for taking those particular breaks in your organization. Another big topic right now, it's sort of an emerging topic. It's transgender and transitioning firefighters and EMTs. And I know that many of your departments have transitioning employees. You may not even know who they are. And so why would you want to know? That's right. They're your fellow firefighters. They have the choice to do a transition or identify as a certain individual. And our responsibility as firefighters and fire officers is to support those sort of transitions if there's a medical issue going on or if there's an identity issue going on that they've identified as whatever, I think that it's our duty as firefighters and good citizens is to say, we support you. We prevent the harassment. If we see it going on in your department, you stop it. There's no obligation on anybody to tell anybody that they're going through this. And so sometimes, and many times, we find out through the rumor mill, that old John Murphy is transitioning, and you can call John Murphy by a different name and go through that whole process. So, as the Pope talked about, who am I to judge? And I think that that's a good statement to say, is that we have those issues going on in the department, and there's some huge litigation out there as a result of that. And just a couple of them, a Georgia fire chief terminated after she revealed that despite being born a male, she identified as a female and filed suit alleging gender and disability discrimination. Now, at the end of the day, she lost her case. And the lawyers all thought it was just bad lawyering. I'm not sure what it was all about. But anyway, she didn't prevail. But I think it was a good case test to see what the legal market's all about when we have transitioning or firefighters or changing sexual orientation or identifying themselves as a female and not male or vice versa. So it's incumbent on us, I guess, to work through that issue with them, support those transitioning firefighters, and the law essentially has protected them with a recent Supreme Court decision in 2020 protecting gay and transgender workers from workplace discrimination. And so what it did was it had to decide, so the Supreme Court had to decide the following question: is it discrimination because of sex? And applies to many millions of gay and transgender workers. And they said, yeah, they're identifying as a certain sex, and so they're protected. And so we, as employees and employers, have the obligation to, if we know, is to protect and support. And like the judge said, who am I to judge, right? Or I'm sorry, as the Pope said. So nobody should be singled out. And I think that we need to just to understand that whole process. A couple of other things that we talked about in this class is the talking about returning firefighters that are injured on the job. And so let's go back to hiring firefighters with a real or perceived handicap. So you may have somebody who's coming in that has amputation, maybe a military veteran who has an artificial leg or a couple of fingers missing or a limb missing. And the issue is we cannot discriminate against those applying for the job if they can perform the essential elements of the job. And that's one of the standards. The second standard is that, the medical, physical, and even the psychological needs to accompany, or not, what's the word I want? To accommodate those firefighter candidates that are coming in with a disability. Now, one of the other disabilities that we see a lot is dyslexia. And I know that there's a number of firefighters out there who are dyslexic, and there's a process. So if you're taking a test as a new candidate, you need to identify if you need time or a reader or any reasonable accommodation in order for you to be successful. You need to identify that you are, in fact, dyslexic. You put the department that's going to hire you or is going through the testing process on notice. And then you need to provide certification from a medical provider that you are dyslexic. The department's responsibility, and this is not a big leap here, is that they need to either give you additional time to complete the exam, the written exam mostly, or provide a reader for you. And the one of the interesting things was that I was at a class, I did a class, and somebody said, well, we had a firefighter who was in our EMT class, and he was deaf and couldn't use the stethoscope, couldn't hear the patient, and we were unable to make a reasonable accommodation. Are we going to be in trouble? And I'm thinking, well, I think if you identify what the reasonable accommodations are, like sound-powered stethoscope, the individual has hearing aids, can read lips. There's lots of different things that can go on. And I think what, again, you have to do is to provide a reasonable accommodation for people who identify themselves with, a defect like hearing issues. So the other part is that either like under the candidate standard in the 1582 entry level firefighters, hearing is a huge issue. It's an element that you need to be able to pass a hearing test, and if you can't pass the hearing test, that puts you in category A, and that is pretty much exclusionary, that you're not able to come into the fire service. Where our question comes in is, how about if you have a firefighter that loses their hearing during their tenure as a firefighter? They go out on, get evaluated. If you do annual medical physicals, hearing should certainly be one part of that physical passion or physical part of passing the annual certifying exam. And if they can't hear, then our obligation again is to send them to an audiologist, make all reasonable accommodations we possibly can. But there's a case pending out somewhere down south where pranksters fired off fireworks in somebody's under somebody's bunk, and they went deaf as a result of the ear damage. And so we're going to be seeing some of the can that person come back to work? Does that person go out on a full disability? Is there any penalties that have been applied to the perpetrator of the prank and those sorts of things? But for all intents and purposes, it just destroyed this firefighter's career due to a prank. So let's go back to physical disabilities. How about when somebody gets injured on the job, they lose a limb? They're fitted with a prosthesis in order for them to, live a full life. And they want to come back to work. So what's our obligation to bring them back to work? And again, it goes into that can complete the essential elements of the job. And again, there's a number of firefighters out there that have missing lower limbs, that have a prosthesis, they have a hand issue or an arm issue. Until they prove they can't do the job, they should receive their job back. One of the big bugaboos that I've seen, and I've worked with a couple of attorneys around the country, is if you have a heart attack and you go to the cath lab, and then they put a couple of stents in, to open up blocked vessels. Under the NFPA standard, any heart surgery basically disqualifies you under the category A side, which is the new candidate standard. But under the incumbent standard, there's a little fudge room in there. And I think that battling the administration or the disability board is a battle between the medical experts. And so the cases that I've been involved in, fortunately, the medical experts have prevailed. Lots of testing, ejection pressures, treadmills. So they meet a certain standard that's in the NFPA standard. And so these firefighters have come back, but there's any number of them that have to, file a lawsuit against their organization in order to make that happen. And if you read the record and you interpret it correctly, there should be no problem. You should not have to go to litigate this. This is a return to work thing. The other one is there's been a few cases out there, and I know that military action is all over the world, and we have any number of our firefighters who are reservists, or they're National Guard, or those sorts of things that do temporary duty or are assigned on a prolonged deployment under USERRA, USERRA, which is the law that requires that the employer keep the job available for returning servicemen and women that have been deployed as a result of their reserve status. And again, you can read the literature, and there's any number of lawsuits, not only in our area, but in the private sector, where they will deny the employment of a returning veteran after they've been deployed. The USERRA law is sort of, it's not every common attorney such as myself can do a USERRA case. It's people that are sort of steeped in that discipline that you need to find if you've been aggrieved by your organization and you're returning back to work. I know that one of the things that the lawyers did last time was talking about responding to a complaint. I just want to say that I know this is going to challenge a couple of them, but uh, when you're doing internal investigations, so there's a discipline issue going on, and you're doing internal investigations, and one member of our board said, "Yeah, the internal investigation should be done internally, because who better than the investigator knows the department." My only objection to that is that there's lots of different factors in there that may prevent one employee from investigating another employee. And a lot of it is we don't do investigations that often. And when we do them, we don't usually do them very well. We leave out certain elements and documentation. We didn't talk to everybody. And so, my position is and we don't do a lot of internal investigations anyway. We're usually pretty good about not doing them, only because we pay attention to our policies and the organizations or our codes of conduct. And if we do them, I think your investigator needs to be trained in how to do an investigation. Maybe have a couple under their belt that they may have done internally or been hired outside with another investigator in a different organization. That at least gives them some background as to how to conduct a proper internal investigation. And the only reason I say this is because if it's my experience, and I know that my other attorneys will say the same thing, if there's adverse action against you, you get demoted or disciplined or terminated, you're going to sue, right? And so unless it's clear-cut evidence, and you're probably still going to sue, taking your chances in court, at least for an award, if not getting your job back. So the investigator needs to be, meticulous in documentation, evidence gathering, preservation of evidence. It's just like a lawyer would do when they're working on a claim against another party, or what the police would do when they're doing their investigations. So it has to be very meticulous. It doesn't have to be fast. It just has to be thorough, and collecting evidence and all those sorts of things I think are important. So I agree to disagree with my cohort attorneys that outside investigators may do a better job. And again, only because we don't do a lot of investigations, we're actually not very good at it. So, but again, I think it's incumbent on the leadership to put policies and codes of conduct in play that protect the employees, and so you don't have to have these internal investigations. And even dealing with your outside customer who files a complaint against you for lots of different things, and we have some stories out there. A couple of things electronically. We talked to the Bellevue fire officers about social media. I think the big case that I brought up, and I know that this is a huge case, is the Vanessa Williams case with Kobe Bryant and the helicopter crash. She won a $28 million judgment against the county because firemen, firefighters, EMTs, police officers were taking pictures of the remains and distributing them on the internet on their social media sites. And so the governor basically put into a law saying that it's a crime for first responders to take pictures unless you have an official purpose to do that. And certainly if you distribute that on your social media, the criminal element takes place. So a $20 million or $28 million award against the county is a sizable amount. And I think what our obligation is to preserve that sort of element of the things that we see as firefighters and EMTs are horrific. And so, we don't want that stuff out on social media. And there's a number of states on the East Coast that, again, they have made it a criminal act for us to take pictures of people who are deceased, who are dying, dismembered, those sorts of things, and spread them on our social media. And social media is, I think that, who was the attorney, not the attorney, the reporter. Oh my gosh. Anyway, he said it's like social media is like career suicide. If you put and post stuff on your social media that deals with workplace issues, workplace incidents, responses, and those sorts of things, or making racially disparaging remarks, homophobic remarks. With the war going on in the Middle East right now, there's a lot of fire up on the social media sites. My advice is to stay off those sites. Don't identify yourself as a firefighter or EMT on them. Don't link your job to your social media site. And just, I hate to say this, but we want the sensational aspect of it, but we also need to remain neutral in a lot of these issues. And, my best advice is don't post on social media unless it's family or you're taking pictures of going to Hawaii or a birthday. But, putting antagonistic, homophobic, racist stuff on your social media sites, and there's 100 of them or more, is going to get you in trouble and fired. And so there's lots of cases out there where people have been terminated as a result of that. Sort of the last thing we talked about was behavioral health and firefighter suicides. Jeff Dill does a great job in identifying those the tragic events that have happened across the country. I think that we're probably at more firefighter suicides than lines of duty deaths this year, and that's the way it's been for the last several years. Much of it has to do with prevention and recognition that something with your firefighters has changed. There's lots of training out there. There's a lot of experts that can identify and help you identify in your organization, who's at risk and what to do to help them themselves, right? So time off, therapy, counseling, medication, and that sort of stuff. And so I think it's incumbent on us that we identify. And I know that Paul Combs did one of his illustrations where two firefighters are sitting in the engine. One firefighter had a sign around his neck and said, "I need help." And so the other firefighter said, "I wish it was this easy to identify those that are in need." And so we always go out and help other people. That's our job. We recognize people in distress. We recognize when people are going to hurt themselves, but we don't pay attention to our own people or our own health needs. And so if we're in a position where we need help, we need to reach out, to your spouse or your partner or your fellow firefighter or somebody that can, basically help you help yourself. And a lot of resources are available out there that I think we need to identify and take advantage of. Even many departments may have a chaplain's program. You can talk to your chaplain. Many departments have a peer support program. You should talk to a member of the peer support program. Some departments have psychologists on board. Certainly use those resources in order to help you or a fellow firefighter or somebody is having a difficult time in your organization based on calls, based on family issues, based on financial issues. I mean, there's many causes of why people commit suicide, and it's a sort of progressive step from, an issue that becomes depressive, or you start to use substances, and then your performance falls off, and people are noticing that, you're not the same person as you were 6 months ago. But I think that we have found ourselves afraid to ask. And we need not to be that way. Because, again, if we take care of people in our neighborhoods, in our communities, and again, we need to offer that same service to members of our organization. I think the last thing we talked about is the use of marijuana. I know that, and then this sort of ties back into the behavioral health issue. There are some experimental programs going on using psilocybin mushrooms, using ketamine, using marijuana as a therapeutic modality. The feds right now are trying to get, and hopefully they're successful, is to get marijuana off a category or class 1 drug, which ranks up there as impermissible. The federal government, like if you have a CDL driver's license, which thankfully we don't have, if you're a marijuana user, you're unable to drive. You're unable to get a federal commercial driver's license medical certificate. And so, but there's a lot of good application, I think, in the industry, and a lot of research is coming out using, different modalities in order to treat mental injury and mental health issues. So if you are in those therapeutic programs, you need to talk to your counselor about your job. And if you can do something a little bit differently then that would be the recommended choice until the law gets changed. But again, your organization should have a reasonable suspicion policy about how that whole program works. So if somebody comes in impaired, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, marijuana, it could be alcohol, or it could be other drugs. You have a step-by-step process that you identify, you confirm, you transport for testing, and then you have some sort of a policy on, do they go to therapy? Are they off the job for 30 days? Do you have a last chance agreement? There's a lot of, instead of just going to termination, because I always say that, when you have an experienced firefighter or an EMT, you just don't want to terminate their services to your organization because you spent a lot of time and money and invested in their career. The other thing to think about, too, is when I talk to my wife, Dr. Beth Murphy, we always talk about, what you're looking for is behavioral changes. So, and we need to take advantage of, if I come to work and I'm always the gregarious guy in the beanery and I'm drinking coffee and raising hell in there, and all of a sudden I come to work and I'm sitting in my bunk room all by myself, that's a behavioral change. And so we need to recognize those behavioral changes and identify what we're going to be doing to address those particular behavioral changes as well, and to prevent any sort of suicidal attempts by firefighters. And I know that I don't want to go back to the suicide part because we're on the treatment part, but many times, and unfortunately, going back to Paul Combs' sign, I need help on the, around the firefighter's neck. A lot of times when you talk to fire chiefs or fire officers and one of your members commit suicide, it's like, we had no idea what was going on. What did we miss? And so I think the lesson here is we can't miss anything, right? We got to be vigilant. We have to be attentive. We have to be helpful. And so I think that's part of our jobs as firefighters, as human beings, and as fire officers. Some of the questions that came out of the class I was giving talked about some personal liabilities. If I am charged with sexual harassment or assault or those sorts of things on a firefighter, what's my personal liability? And there is a case in downstate Washington, down in Longview, one of the paper mills down there. There's unrelenting harassment that went on one of the employees, and so she filed a lawsuit against the department, his organization, and the supervisor himself. And what ended up happening at the end of the day is the company basically got dismissed from the claim, and the supervisor was solely responsible for these sort of stalking issues, harassment, discrimination that was 24/7. So when the employee was at work, the behavior occurred there. When the employee went home, through texting, telephones, electronic media, that whole thing just kept going on and on and on. And so, and she went through the process of telling them to stop. They didn't stop. So yes, the short answer is yes, there's potential for personal liability. And I think, again, you shouldn't conduct yourselves in that particular manner. The other one, we talked about off-duty behavior. One of my firefighters is arrested in a bar, drinking and fighting. And so, or one of my firefighters filming pornographic films in a uniform and distributing on his social media site. I mean, who has a policy for that, right? Nobody does. And so you should, in addition to your policies, have a code of conduct. And a code of conduct basically describes what your actions will be off duty in a bar, in a restaurant, those sorts of things. And so you can, discipline or terminate somebody for violating your code of conduct. And I recommend that every department has one because we can't create a policy for everything. We try. And so, and most of the time, I call them, one-day wonder policies, is we create a policy in order to address one thing that we didn't have a policy about, and now we have a policy about it. Nobody commits, basically violates the policy. So it sits in your books for 20 years and is never activated. So the code of conduct policy is a good sort of global policy that kind of picks up all of the things that you couldn't even think about when you're creating your policy. And so there's a number of agencies that will create policies for you. Lexipol is one. Not that I'm promoting them, but they have a good product, and you want to kind of take a look at those sorts of things. I think I'm done. And so there's any number of things we could talk about, but I think I hit the high points of the class. And I only wish that as I kind of moved up in the ranks, other than learning from my bad mistakes and other people's bad mistakes, which is not a bad way to learn because it's a lesson remembered well. I think these classes are valuable to new employees, new and promoted officers, all the way up through the chain, all the way to the fire chief. And so I know that our other three attorneys do a lot of lecturing and writing. My advice to you is to listen to what they say. Sometimes I get frustrated because, I go to a place and I teach a class, and then the neighboring department commits the violation that I taught about, and they should have attended the class. And it's just like, it makes me scratch my head because it's like, you should learn not to commit these violations. You should learn not to violate your policies and learn from other people's mistakes. We do that in the fire service when we're fighting a fire. And I know that, and unfortunately, in New Jersey, the two firefighters died in a shipboard fire event. Should have never been in there, right? That's what everybody's saying, that shipboard firefighting is a dangerous profession. And there's professionals out there. I know that when I did a study in Long Beach and Los Angeles, they have professional firefighters that are experts, Coast Guard as well, in shipboard firefighting. And when I was in the Navy on a ship, we practiced almost every day. And so, because it's dangerous. And so if we're not used to that sort of environment, people die as a result of that. It's an unfortunate tragedy for the two firefighters and for the departments and their family, but lessons learned, right? So a lot of departments are saying, oh my God, I have a port facility in my district. I better do something about a shipboard firefighting training and practice and whatnot. So we learn in the fire service. We should learn on the HR side that we can get into a jam in no time, and it's going to take us 2 or 3 years to get out of it, especially if there's a lawsuit. So without further ado, I wish everybody happy holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. Be safe out there, and hopefully next time you won't see just my lovely face, but you'll see my other three cohorts as well. And I just want to say one thing, that I am now a new fire commissioner, elected position. Oh yeah. In Fire District 38 in Washington State, which surrounds the cities of North Bend and Snoqualmie. It was an unchallenged race, so I was the sole candidate, and I had 7 people vote against me. Probably not my friends, but I had over 2,000 people who did vote for me, and they're all my friends. So, all right, you guys take care, be safe, and we'll see you next month.
The Fire Store, equipping protectors with passion. Every decision the Fire Store makes as a company is about its customers. As the holiday season has quickly approached, explore a wide selection of unique and practical gifts at the Fire Store's Gift Center. Find the perfect presents for firefighters, EMTs, and first responders today. The Fire Store's goal is to get you the gear you need when you need it at prices you can afford. Visit thefirestore.com for everything but the truck and shop its family of brands including Streamlight, MSA, Lion, FLIR, and more.